I'm Laura.
And I'm Lowell.
Welcome to the Laura and Lowell Show, and we have Susan here today. Hi, Susan.
Susan Rosenbluth, the editor and publisher and founder, founded in 1987, of the Jewish Voice and Opinion, here we are, out of Englewood, New Jersey. We're in Englewood right now.
You are indeed.
Yes.
Welcome to Englewood.
Thank
you. Laura, what do you want to start off with the first question for Susan?
Sure. Susan, thank you first of all for having us today. And second, I would like to know, as a journalist, how you got your first start to do this creative work. I admire it.
Somebody who likes to write, those of us who like to write, I would say we hate two things. We hate writing and we hate not writing.
Right.
And when you write something, unless you're just writing for your journal, the idea is to get it out there.
Get it out.
Whether you're talking about fiction or nonfiction, you want it out there, so you look for vehicles.
Okay.
And in the early 1980s, I was approached by a local Jewish newspaper and asked me to do something, because I am a teacher. I was teaching elementary school at the time in a Jewish day school, and asked me to write something about where
What year are
Jewish
we in,
education.
Susan?
1981.
Okay.
And I wrote something about how education will always be about the teacher and the child, even in the days of computers, and even if we're going to talk about computerizing things, at the end of the day there has to be some sort of an adult person who will come over and look at what the child has done. Anyway, it was received very nicely, and they asked me to start writing for them, which I did. And some of my work was picked up by other Jewish newspapers. The New York Times asked me to write for the New Jersey section of the New York Times, which I did.
Oh, nice.
When the Federation opened for a very short period of time a local Jewish newspaper, they asked me if I would write for it. And what I realized at that point, after doing this for a number of years, was that the secular Jewish community liked the Orthodox community just fine, as long as we were singing and dancing. When we sang and danced, they loved us. When we had something to say, they didn't like us so much anymore. And there was no way of getting our voice out. By this point, there were a number of people who knew who I was, and I kind of held my breath and said, let's see if we can do a monthly news magazine that will present the voice that is not normally heard.
Very good.
There were people who would say to me, when they looked at the Jewish Voice, how come you're not more even-handed? And my answer would be, if I thought for a minute that the Jewish Voice and Opinion was the only publication, the only thing you were reading, you are right. We would have to be even-handed and give every point of view and his grandmother's point of view. But I'm very confident that you're reading other things. Therefore, what I'm trying to do here is to give you the side that you don't normally see. We are the other side.
I like that.
Now I trust you
Yes.
to take what you know, take what we've presented, and go make up your own mind. I have a great deal of confidence in our readers. I always say, never, never underestimate your reader's intelligence. Never overestimate anybody's information.
What is the difference between a Jew who is a journalist, many Jews are in the media, and Jewish journalism?
Any journalist who writes has to write something that the reader wants to read. This becomes a problem sometimes in general journalism, because sometimes what the journalist thinks is very important, the rest of the community flips through. If you don't grab me in the first sentence, I'll go do something else. Jewish journalists, that's someone who is Jewish, who is writing for the Jewish community, is a very, very lucky journalist. Because almost by definition, my readers are interested. If it has to do with the Jewish world, they want to know about it. If a Jew gets cut in Argentina, we bleed in Englewood.
Interesting.
If somebody gets hurt in Israel, in Israel we're interested in the price of cottage cheese. I know it was a big deal for the Israelis, but even here in Englewood,
Right.
we cared what
See.
you were doing with your cottage cheese in Tel Aviv, because if it affects
Yes.
Jews anywhere, if it affects people anywhere,
People
we are interested. But you really have to show me that it's something I'm going to want to know
It
about.
plays the heartstring.
If you get, but I don't even have to worry about that if I'm writing about Jews for
Right.
the Jewish community. Because by definition, they want to know what's happening.
Right. So, Susan, you represented a, would you say, national religious point of view
Yes.
that was outside the, at the time that you established your newspaper, which is a monthly newspaper, was not being represented by the establishment Jewish newspapers in the secular, non-religious world.
And we weren't getting our voice out. It was the stereotypes, I mean, to the point where someone who lived beyond the Green Line, in the territories that were taken by Israel in the 1967 Six-Day War, were treated as though these were a foreign species, something called settlers.
Right, till today, Jews who live in Judea and Samaria, the Israelite tribal homelands of the land of Benjamin, Judah, and Ephraim, are called settlers. It's almost as if they're not people. As a matter of fact, on the day of the expulsion of 10,000 Jewish men, women, and children from Gush Katif in August 2005, which is universally understood in Israel to be an absolute catastrophe, socially, politically, economically, in every way.
Morally.
Morally, that of course. The very day that happened, Haaretz had a full-page story with a big photo that you would expect to see from Germans filming in the Warsaw Ghetto. What did it show? It showed Jewish children playing and jeering photographers surrounding them. What was the caption? Like dinosaurs before their extinction. Now, I thought an Israeli paper is writing about Jewish children like dinosaurs before their extinction. That's what you would expect the Germans to write in 1942 with their papers in Warsaw, and yet there it was. So, Susan says, treating them not like people. The good side of the bad side of the catastrophe that befell Israel with the Oslo death process was put up very well, stated very well in one sentence on a website, a person I know in Canada who's very anti-Israel, but I like to look anywhere for real information. This person writing about Israel said, in one sentence, equals MC squared, what happened to Israel? Israel withdrew from Gaza, the rockets kept falling, and the left collapsed.
You know,
in one sentence.
Aryeh, I always think it is very interesting. If you were to say to anybody, here's Israel, here was Gaza. While the Jews were there and the army was there, the people who would like to try to kill the Israelis, the Jews, were not able to get into Israel proper. When they gave up being here and they moved here, I don't think it was exactly rocket science to say that people who want to kill you can now come here and they get closer. They're able to do it more effectively, which of course we have seen in the communities of Sderot. The important thing that a paper like mine can do is we refuse to call the places where people live settlements. Instead, what we call them are Jewish communities. One of the things that has been so good about calling it, referring to it, these are residents of Judea and Samaria, these are parts of Israel, they live in communities in Judea and Samaria, is that it makes people stop and think. I was asked what I thought would be an ideal situation. I said, I have no idea what an ideal situation is. But I said, I don't think it's, again, rocket science. We know that in Israel proper today, there are Arab communities, there are Arab villages.
Right.
They're celebrated, tourists are taken to see them. What would be the catastrophe if there ever is a place, a state that they put up called Palestine, if you had Jewish villages in Palestine? In other words, someone who lives there just like if you lived in Paris, you can
Yes.
maintain an American citizenship, may have a home 3 miles away from, or 2 miles away from Israel proper.
Right.
So there are Israeli citizens, but the actual land, if it ever came to be, would be Palestine. They continue living there, very much like, I hate to go far back in history, but 1803, when you
Okay.
had the Louisiana Purchase.
Right.
They took over Louisiana. The language of the people on the streets in New Orleans was French. When the land became American
Right.
and the language was English, it didn't stop these people from continuing to talk French. People continued
It's a good
living.
point.
They continued working on their land, however they were working. The political structure changed, but not their day-to-day lives. When we just saw, I think last week it was reiterated again, Mahmoud Abbas, who was the leader of the Palestinian Authority, came out and said, there will be no Israelis living in Palestine.
Right.
No Jews in Palestine.
This is one of the points of our friend, the Muslim Zionist Sheikh Abdul Hadi Palazzi from Rome, who is a Sunni Muslim cleric and also part of the Qadariya Sufi order. He said the tip-off that this is all wrong is, why is it that if land would be given to a so-called Palestinian authority, if you really have peace, why does it have to be Judenrein, free of Jews? If there's really a peace, that's not a question. He also discussed border changes between Yugoslavia and Italy and Austria.
Exactly.
No one's asked to move. Well, the Jews are expected to move. He said it's not real. And that's the way you know it's not real.
So you had your former foreign minister, Avigdor Lieberman, who came out and said, well, if Jews are not allowed to live in Palestine, then obviously Arabs shouldn't be allowed to live in Israel. And
Good point.
and the Arabs around the world
Right.
screamed, you're going to throw them out? So what you really have is you have people who are saying, Jews and Arabs can't live together. Therefore, who gets thrown out? That's what they're saying.
Yes, that is what they're saying.
And what kind of a position is that if we're going to be talking about peace?
It flows very naturally, unfortunately, because of the classical Christian Jew hatred in the Roman Catholic and state Protestant lands of Europe, the teachings about Jews. This is bubbling up all the time, and unfortunately the anti-Jewish teachings in many parts of the Muslim world, but it's important to keep in mind that there are many Muslims who are pro-Israel, like in Uzbekistan.
Isn't it amazing, Ariane, that the anti-Semitism continues, even though in
It's
so
sad.
many ways we're talking about post-Christian Europe.
Supposedly.
Europe, there are more warm bodies, I'm not talking percentage, more warm bodies in mosques on Friday than there are Christians in church.
In
sorry.
Europe
Really?
now? I didn't
Really?
realize that.
I didn't
There
know
are,
that.
you go into any church in Europe, I mean, some of these magnificent cathedrals, which had
Yes.
been Catholic cathedrals and then became Anglican cathedrals, and you say they're beautiful places, and you can speak to people because they
Yes.
do have docents who are willing to take you
That's
around,
nice.
and you ask them, is the church still in use? Are there services? And, oh yes, and do you have a turnout on Sundays? We get 25 people. The church can hold 10,000.
Wow.
You go into a
That's
storefront
sad.
mosque, and it's teeming. By the way, it's also true in synagogues. If you go into conservative or reformed temples on a normal Sabbath, when there is no bar mitzvah, people are
Right.
not coming in, you don't have a lot of people. In the Orthodox community, we have what I call, statistics may lie, baby carriages don't lie. Check
Yes.
to see how many carriages you have out front. If it looks like a park,
Interesting.
you know that you're talking about a
Yes.
thriving community. If you're talking about a place where the rabbi gets up and talks to 12 people on a normal week, I'm not talking about when there's something, you know that you're dealing with something else. There are some exceptions. I'll give you an example. One of the things that we in Jewish journalism get involved in are polls.
Oh.
Demography is everything.
Really?
And for many, many, many years, I'm a little older than For many, many years.
She's Susan's using my Hebrew name, Aryeh,
Oh.
which
right.
my English name is Lowell, but they're the same. Aryeh means adult male lion, and Lowell comes from Leo and Leon, and they're all lion-based names, and Lowell in German. But okay, it's the same me.
For many years, we used to say that when they asked how many Jews there were in America, the number given was 6 million, and there was this very kind of mystical feeling between the 6 million who were lost during the Holocaust and the 6 million American Jews. Kind of the dirty secret is that that number has been diminishing. It went down to 5. There were people who were saying we may be talking more about 4.5. In the year 2000, the federations, which are the UJA
Susan means the
groups,
Jewish federations.
right, did a study. And the study came out with almost exactly the same kind of numbers that we've had all along. They didn't really talk about the number of people, but like they said, the biggest group was the conservative group, and maybe in the Orthodox we were talking about 10%, maybe 20% if you looked at the numbers by who is affiliated. And by the way, affiliation did not mean synagogue affiliation. If you belong to ORT, which is a Jewish organization that deals with the vocational training, they call that being affiliated, and they came out with their numbers. The numbers didn't make sense to me, even anecdotally. They didn't make sense. So I, as a journalist, I asked for the raw data, and they gave it to me. They didn't count people. They counted households.
Wow.
So that an empty nest woman, a widow, who belonged to a conservative
Right.
synagogue, counted the same as a Hasidic family with 18 children.
Wow.
Because they counted households.
That
That's
sounds like very creative accounting.
Now, I remember at the time I said, I don't think we'll ever see another poll like this, another study like this, because they are as smart as I am.
Right.
Those 18 children are going to grow up. I mean,
Yes.
yeah, doesn't take rocket science here. They never did, they didn't do quite that poll, but this last year, a study came out done by the New York Jewish Federation of the 5 boroughs of New York, plus Nassau, Suffolk, and Westchester County.
Okay.
And the most important number to come out of that, hold on to your
Okay.
kippah, is that 63% of all children under the age of 18 who identify as Jewish are Orthodox.
It's a tremendous...
Think of that, what we're saying.
Okay,
63% of children under the age of 18, which means it's a growing number,
Yes.
and the number of Jews is starting to climb.
Wh- wh-
Because we're talking about people who have children.
Children.
When Susan says
Right.
Orthodox, she means traditionally, religiously observant Jews.
Correct.
And the numbers, that's almost up to 70% then when you hit, the numbers are probably
63%.
real than the statistics.
Well,
more.
what's happening is that I hate the divisions when you talk about the traditionally
Yeah.
observant community. From my way of thinking, there are a few things that are followed, and after that, go see how you want to do it.
Okay.
And there's people who are traditionally observant of the Sabbath. We're not talking about their own creative ways of being observant.
Right.
People who observe the Sabbath in the
Uh-huh.
traditional way. We're talking about people who observe the laws, the dietary laws.
Yes.
And
Kashrut, kosher
Kashrut.
laws.
Kosher laws. And once you've taken care of the Sabbath and holidays and kashrut, the other nuances either
Yeah.
come or don't come. There are, to turn around and say we're going to decide whether someone is observant because a woman wears slacks or wears a skirt, they can still belong to the same
Susan's
synagogue.
talking about the basics, and with regard to that, we had a great sage, Rabbi Dr. Joseph Soloveitchik, whose wife did not cover her hair, and most ladies in the traditionally observant community do. And he was asked, why doesn't your wife cover her hair? And he said, like a real man in my opinion, ask her!
Right.
Ask her, what are you asking me for? He had no problem with that. So Susan's talking about the very basics
People
for
who, even when we try to make the
Shabbat
divisions,
observance and kosher
When they
observance,
try to make-
prayer.
when you try to make the divisions within that, my answer is they can all go into the same, the men can go into the same synagogue, the women will know where they're sitting, the men will know where they're sitting, and they can all pray together. They don't
Okay.
need a
Yeah.
different prayer book.
That's
They don't-
right.
They can all, and as long as we're talking about that, people get more comfortable in their own communities, that's nothing new, but we're not talking, when I see some of the divisions in Israel, it makes me want to shriek, because there is no difference.
Yes.
That I like to use the term Israelite. There were 12 tribes, the Jewish people descended from Judah and Simon and Benjamin from the return after the destruction of the first temple under Nebuchadnezzar and then the dispersion by the Romans, is a small part of a large people. And one of our traditional beliefs is that the lost tribes will return.
Amen.
And unfortunately, many people in the traditionally observant so-called Orthodox world may read what we call the Amidah, the 18 benedictions. They're the basic prayer in the morning, afternoon, and evening prayers is 18 statements, which relate to the reestablishment of the kingdom of David and Solomon, the resurrection of the dead, the rebuilding of the temple. Unfortunately, many people read it, yeah, but oh, come on, that's not real. From someone like me, with my way of looking at things, I say, look, if you don't believe it, don't read it, because I take those things seriously. So we are Israelites, of which Jews are a small part. Susan, I want to ask you a question, because we're going to conclude in a minute. Laura has a question. How did a paper, the Jewish Voice and Opinion, which began as a local community paper in Englewood, New Jersey, for the traditionally religious Jewish community here, become a global paper with a global audience far outside the Jewish community? Because that has happened.
Yes, it has. And again, I've often said that the observant Jewish community for many, many years was a sleeping giant. We were very content to let the secular world make statements. Unfortunately, people thought that's how all of us felt. And when you start to put something in print and it lives on paper, it lives a life of its own.
It does.
All of a sudden, somebody is looking and they're saying, something happened on the Temple Mount that wasn't fair. Why are the murderers of Jews being released so we can have peace? Why does someone who wants peace want murderers to be released? I mean, are we all going crazy?
Right.
That's
And so you write something like this, and somebody who looks at it and says, well, wait a minute. I wasn't told that in the New York Times.
Right.
No one in the New York Times told me that someone who was being released murdered children. Nobody told me that when we've seen that picture of Mohammed al-Dura, the child who was supposedly murdered
Right.
by Israelis because they were firing bullets and he died in his father's arms. Nobody told me that the raw footage showed afterwards that the child was moving his legs and his
Right.
elbow. Nobody told me that there was a Mohammed al-Dura who died that morning and was taken to the hospital at 10 o'clock and died,
Right.
and that this Mohammed al-Dura, this incident happened at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You have to know, then you have to interview Philippe Carcenti.
I did 2 interviews with him.
And you begin to realize there's lots of information. Is it being done purposefully? It's very hard to write if you have a narrative. If you
Okay.
have a narrative that says, Israeli soldiers kill Arabs, to suddenly say, wait a minute, not exactly. I always want to say, whenever we want to say that Israeli soldiers killed some Palestinians, and I always want, well, they were at home peacefully reading the Quran. I mean, they were not at home peacefully reading the Quran. Something happened. You need somebody to say, here is what happened. The Israelis did not go into Gaza because that would have been fun and games, and we felt like
Right.
killing people. It had to do with missiles coming, lobbing into children's homes and schools.
Right.
Why?
Why?
Why were the missiles coming
Why?
lobbing in? Well, because you left Gaza, so there was nobody there to
Right.
form the barrier. This is what these people had been doing all along, before there was a barrier. Now that barrier is missing, so the barrier has come. Either you're going to go back and save them, or you're going to come up with Iron Dome, or you're going to come up with something. To me, one of the most horrible things, and I know we're going to probably close on this, but
Right.
one of the most horrible things and the most racist things is when we decide to treat anybody who is not behaving according to the rules and not insisting that they do, and giving them a pass when they don't. If we are going to treat, if we're going to treat Palestinians as a force of nature rather than as human beings, we don't argue with
Good
a hurricane.
point.
If a
Right,
hurricane
that's
is coming,
right.
we board up the windows,
That's
we
it.
tape them.
Yes.
No one would say, let me appoint you to be the negotiator.
Right.
Go out and talk to the hurricane, go talk to the tornado.
Yes.
What you're going to do is you're going to protect
Yes.
yourself from it.
From it.
We're not going to send you out to be the negotiator to talk if there are bears running around out here. We're going to say, how do you protect yourself and your children
Right.
from the bears? I refuse to think about Palestinians as being anything less than as intelligent and as caring. I mean, I know Golda Meir said we will have peace when the Arabs love their children more than they hate us. I'm going to make the leap that they love their children. Therefore, I refuse to allow it to be denigrated to the point where we're not going to be talking about human beings. If you are going to go and murder a family in Itamar and slit a 3-month-old's throat,
Could you say what Itamar is for
Itamar
our
was
viewers?
one of the communities in Judea and Samaria in which some Arab terrorists came and murdered a family in their beds, including a 3-month-old infant who was lying in the crook of her father's
That's so
arm.
By
sad.
cutting the throats with a knife.
That's terrible.
And somehow or other, we're talking about these as the kind of people who should be released from prison because we want peace. And if somebody will understand that and explain it to me, I'll be delighted. Maybe you'll do it on our next visit.
Right. Laura, you have a
Sure.
concluding
I
question
just-
or comment?
Want to thank you, Susan. This was a wonderful interview, and being a storyteller and doing the work that you do, you've enlightened me, and thank you.
Good. You'll read it in the Jewish Voice and Opinion.
Right.
Okay.
Susan, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
And the Jewish Voice and Opinion will give you the link to
You can
see
it on
online.
television. You can see it online, jewishvoiceandopinion.com, and spelled out, A-N-D.
Susan, thank you very much. And thanks to our viewers and listeners.